Okay, everyone. So what we're going to do right now is I am going to show you all the first unit discussion. I'm going to explain what what the unit discussions are, purpose. Then of course we're going to go over the actual unit discussion question, and I'm going to walk you all through in terms of how to go about working on this question. I'm going to show you all the rubric so that you all can see what I'm looking for when I'm grading this in terms of the grade points and all that. And what I'll also do is I'm also going to give you all some tips, some hints, kind of like a walkthrough, kind of like a video game walkthrough, right? Where they walk you through like, okay, this is what you do. I'm going to do the same thing here, where I'm going to give you all, like, I'm going to simulate if I was in you all's position and I was pretending to be you all as students, how would I answer this question? So that way you all can get an example of how to do this. So that's what we're going to be working on here today. So we'll do that to finish up class here. So let's hope that it doesn't crash this time. Okay, so let me go ahead and share the screen. Okay. So you all should be seeing the Blackboard screen, right? So what you're going to do is so the unit discussion is going to be towards the end, right? And I do need to change these due dates because I know I need to push everything back here. So I'll push everything back for the quiz as well. Just give me some time to do this. But okay, so let me go ahead and click on the unit discussion here, right? Okay, so the way the discussions work here, everyone, is I'm going to pick a question from the specific unit that we're working on. So this question is going to come from chapter 1 of what we've worked on already here. So this should sound familiar, right? So it says please answer the following questions. Okay, also note the discussions are worth 100 points. So please answer the following questions. Now it says questions because even though this is a unit discussion question, also keep in mind that there are questions within the questions, right? Because as you can see here, there's two questions, right? So the question reads, describe the three political cultures described in this chapter. So this, of course, goes back to chapter 1, what we discussed, right? This, of course, we talked about those three major political cultures when we were describing the political cultures up in up in the Northeast, in states like New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, that area, and then also moving towards the upper Midwest areas like Minnesota, and then moving on to the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington, as well as Hawaii. That, of course, is the moralistic political culture, right? We talked about that in those areas tend to be, more liberal, more progressive. So they tend to be more focused on, assisting, the group, right? Assisting society instead of being more so about individualism, which that leads us to the next one, right? The individualistic political culture, right? Where this, of course, is what we see mostly in like the Great Plains area, moving up through like Nebraska, the Dakotas, moving west towards Montana, Idaho, those areas. And of course, there's also a mix of that in the American South as well, but they tend to focus more on the traditionalistic, right? And we talked before how Texas is a mixture of those two, right? Texas tends to be a mixture of individualistic and traditionalistic, right? So those are the two other ones, right? The individualistic tends to focus more on the individual and government, not necessarily providing for the group as a whole, but more so to allow for the individual to be able to maximize their abilities within society. And then traditionalistic also does that as well, but traditionalistic also takes it a little bit further, where traditionalistic political cultures try to keep the status quo going, right? That's what traditionalism is, right? To keep the way things are, to kind of allow for the system set up to still be the same because they're set up for a reason, type of thing. That's why they tend to discourage political participation in those areas, right? So again, so those are the three political cultures we talked about, and then of course, obviously you're going to be, so the first thing you do, I pretty much did that for you, all right? You're going to list and describe the three political cultures, right? So you're not just going to list them, but you're actually going to give a description, which I just did. You're going to give a description of the political cultures that we saw in this chapter. And then, in your opinion, the second question, what makes Texas a unique state politically and culturally, right? So here you can expand upon what I was just talking about, right? That Texas is a mixture of mostly traditionalistic and individualistic political culture. You could make an argument that the Austin area has some moralistic, as Austin has become, kind of like the epicenter of like liberalism in Texas. That's why a lot of people compare it to like California, right? You probably heard that phrase, "Don't California my Texas," right? That's probably that's something that's being discussed a lot in Texas because especially with what's going on in the Austin area. But again, it's you all's answer, so you're more than welcome to pick and choose, some of the ideas that I'm giving you all and what you've read in the book. But yeah, but the second one, of course, asks you to talk about the unique aspects of, in terms of Texas when it comes to its politics and its culture, and also the history as well. You can also, touch on the history that we talked about in chapter 1, and how the historic, the Texas's rich history, as I've said before. I would put Texas history, up against any other state, and I think Texas history would pretty much blow any other state out of the water. Some of these other states, they just were territories and then they became states, but how many of them actually fought a revolutionary war to be an independent republic? I know California did also towards the, as we get into the Mexican-American War, but Texas, they stayed an independent republic for almost a decade. So, you can talk about some of that, and also talk about the fact that those historical events, right? That Texas was its own independent republic. It fought a revolutionary war. That a lot of the settlers that came and populated Texas came from the American South, so they brought their that culture with them, right? That conservative culture influenced by limited government, more local government control. The Jacksonian principles of democracy, right? Because Andrew Jackson, was, he rose to become, president at the time, at around the same time when Texas was having their own issues with Mexico, right? You can also compare how that some of the same issues that Texas had with Mexico in terms of fighting back against a strong central government that wanted to centralize power and take away local control. Talk about how you can also compare that to what happened in the American Revolutionary War with the British trying to take local control from the colonists, right? That's why the Texas Revolution is very similar in terms of the politics of it, very similar to what we saw with the American Revolutionary War. So you can talk about that, and also talk about other things in Texas that make Texas unique, right? The Texas unique culture of how, people from Texas, you've seen the Texas memes, right? That people tend to think very highly of Texas, right? That, some people might consider themselves Texans first before Americans, right? Things like that. So you can talk about how, that the Texans have a very high opinion of themselves and their state. They take a lot of pride in their state, right? And for good reason, because of the rich history and the rich culture. So these are some ideas in terms of how I would go about answering this question, right? And again, and you're definitely going to use examples from the book, because this is definitely what I'm looking for when it comes to these discussions, everyone. So if you provide examples from the readings, and I'm not saying that you have to cite from the book, but I don't want you to just give your opinion on these questions here, right? So the second one is, obviously, of course, it's going to ask you to give your opinion, but you have to give examples. So did you see how I gave examples to back up my opinion? That's what I'm looking for too. I want for you all to give those examples, like I mentioned, about mentioning historical events in Texas's history, mentioning the migration patterns and where those people were coming from, and they were bringing their culture, right? I mean, because I'm sure if some of you all, I've never really, well, I guess you could say that summer I spent in Waco, I guess you kind of count that moving somewhere else, but I've never really like moved like outside of, and also that semester that I was in Laredo for Time U, but then Laredo is very similar to here, so it's not really all that different. Waco was pretty different in terms of the culture. But with that being said, some of y'all may have moved from different places, right? So you can use your own personal experiences to, like, if any of y'all have moved from another state and now you're living in Texas, maybe you can compare and contrast the two places that you've lived at, and maybe add that to your answer. So you can definitely make this your own, but definitely make sure that you provide examples, right? That you provide examples from the readings, but also from things you've seen on the news, as well as personal experiences. But make sure that you that you go into detail on those personal experiences. But don't just make it just personal experience, right? Make sure that you also mention things from the book, right? So does that make sense in terms of, if I was doing this, how I would write it? Does that kind of make sense in terms of, giving those examples and being detailed with those examples? That's what I'm looking for in terms of the first initial post here. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. Now, with each unit discussion, there's going to be 3 total posts per discussion. So this is the first post that you're going to do, right? The first post you're going to do is you're going to answer the question. Now, it's funny that I talk about this because I actually have my own discussions that I have to work on tonight for my own grad classes. So I'm going to be in your shoes in a few hours. Like I'm going to be the one having to answer these things for the class that I'm taking. So it's kind of interesting that we're kind of in the same boat here in different ways. But so what you're going to do, of course, like I said, and again, I didn't come up with this. My professor uses this too. I think this is, I know she didn't come up with this. This is something that I think has been used for many years, and it's the standard that I think we use in discussions, right? Where you make one post that answers the question, and then you respond to two other classmates, right? So it's going to be the same thing here. So that's what you're going to be doing, right? So let's kind of read through this a bit here. So submit initial post early in the week and subsequent responses to the posts of your peers at timely intervals throughout the session. The goal is to have a dynamic discussion around the topic that lasts through the entire week, which means it's a good idea to visit the discussions link to see if new posts are made, right? So this is supposed to simulate a discussion, right? I don't just want to have a situation where people are just posting like at the last minute right before it's due, right? Definitely try to post early so that we can get the discussion going, right? And allow for that free flow of information and thoughts and opinions and discussions, right? And things like that. So that way it's because the purpose of the discussions, everyone, is to simulate what we would be doing, if we were, I mean, I guess, and we sort of are, because we are meeting at intervals. We're just meeting over the internet. So we kind of do have some of these discussions as well. But it's supposed to simulate like kind of like when we'd have like a class discussion, where if I was to ask you all this question, in class, how would we discuss it and keep the discussion moving forward, right? So that's what it's supposed to simulate. It's supposed to simulate how we would do this if we were in the actual class here, like we're actually meeting. So that's why I want you all to do that and try to keep those discussions going. Of course, you can also subscribe to each forum to be alerted in your responses. Posts and responses should be thorough and thoughtful. Just posting an "I agree" or "good ideas" will not be considered adequate. Now, again, you can start with that. I mean, I know, you can definitely start with that. You can start, that if you agree with something or disagree with something, and then you move forward from there, right? So it's not enough just to say that you agree or good job, that was a good post. No, that there has to be more than that, right? So that's, so that is, so you definitely have to do that. And again, down here, this gives more of the, down here, this gives more of the, and I think we're seeing some posts already. So I think there's been some posts that have been made. But again, so we'll, so I want for y'all to have a good understanding of how to go about doing this. So again, so don't just leave it at that. Don't just leave it at agree or disagree, or that you did really well. Make sure that you are actually, you support statements with examples, experiences, or references, like I was talking about, right? I want you, and I'll explain right now in terms of how to do the responses here in a bit, because those do give students a little bit of trouble here, right? So respond to at least two of your peers. Discussions occur when there is dialogue. Therefore, you need to build upon the posts and responses of other learners to create discussion threads. Make sure to revisit the discussion forum and respond if necessary to what other learners have posted to your initial responses, right? So even though there's 3 total posts, you don't have to limit it at 3. If you want to keep adding to the discussion, you're more than welcome to do so. I know I've done that as well. Like, let's say I've got a good discussion going in my class, and it gets really, really good. Like, I'll definitely respond back, and we'll have, some good discussions, kind of like what you see like on social media, right? But don't do it like social media where we have to be respectful, which I know that goes without saying, but of course I'll mention it again. Just keep in mind that as we are discussing these topics, some of these topics can be a little bit intense, right? Especially when we get to like the political parties chapter, where that one kind of asks you to kind of talk about, political issues that you support or don't support, or why. That can be a little bit heated, but keep in mind, everyone, that this is not going to turn into Twitter. This is not going to turn into Facebook. We are not going to be calling each other names. We are not going to be disrespecting anyone. This is an academic setting. This is how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have disagreements respectfully, and that's okay to have disagreements. In fact, I want for there to be disagreements. I don't want for everyone to just agree with everyone, because then we don't really learn anything, right? We don't learn different perspectives. We don't learn different views of the world, right? We don't learn about different people and different experiences, because all of us are very unique in that there's not one person in this world that has gone through exactly the same thing we have, right? Or have reacted to different, to things, right? Because you could also have a situation where 2 people might go through the same thing, but they might react in 2 totally different ways because they've had things that they've gone through, right? And maybe that influences how they view the world, how they see the world. I know I can say for myself that, when it comes to my own political viewpoints, there are several events that have happened in my life that have influenced how I am politically. And not just events that have happened to me personally, but also events that I've seen in terms of how people have been treated in life. That also influences how I view things, right? So the same thing with the discussions, right? That you can bring those personal thoughts and viewpoints, but just make sure that you respect each other, right? So we are college students. We're in an academic setting. This is not over there social media. You want to go do that over there, that's fine. But in an academic setting, I definitely expect for you all to be respectful of each other, and I don't think we should have a problem with that because I know we're all here for a reason. So again, so then it's like we're talking about, and then the rubric. Of course, I'm going to show you all right now what the rubric is. But again, so this is what I'm going to talk about here. This is what you all really need to pay attention about when it comes to discussions, because I do count the words here, right? So as well as sentences, right? So there are sentence and word length requirements for the post. So the first post must contain at least 200 words and 5 sentences, right? So, and it makes sense that that one would be longer because that one is where you're going to actually answer the question and you're going to give the detailed responses and examples, right? I'm sorry, the detailed examples. Then you make 2 other posts to your classmates, right? So you must also respond to at least 2 of your classmates' answers, and each of your responses must contain at least 5 complete sentences, and they must contain 100 words, right? So the same 5 sentences for both of them, but in the initial post, you do have to write more. You have to write the 200 words because you're going to actually be answering the question, right? And as you can see here, there's 2 questions, right? So you're not going to be able to do this entire prompt justice if you're only writing like 50 words, right? You have to go more into detail. So make sure that you 2 pay attention to this because I do count the words. Like I copy it over to Word document and then I count the words. So if you don't meet the requirements, then you're going to get docked, and you're going to get docked pretty heavily because I'm going to show you all the rubric right now. So does that make sense, right? There has to be 3 total posts and 2 responses. Now let me go over the responses really quickly because I know this is something that students kind of get a little bit. This is something that gives students some problems here. The way I would do a response is, let's say someone talks about, if we're going back to the political culture of Texas, let's say someone talks about, the impact that the Civil War had on Texas and ultimately led to the radical Reconstruction with the radical Republicans. And then we had the Constitution of 1876, which was a direct result of E.J. Davis and the radical Republicans. So let's say I want to respond to that, and let's say you talk about that a bit. Then, the way I would respond to that is, like, let's say, you're making a strong argument and I agree with that. You could add to that discussion. You can also add that the Grange movement also had an impact in terms of the way the 1876 Constitution was written by, in terms of the Grange movement wanting more regulation of the railroads and the banks, and how these farmers were being exploited and taken advantage of because the railroads were just marking them up for such outrageous prices that they couldn't even make a profit. In some cases, they were losing money. So you see how what I just did, I added something to the discussion because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to build upon the posts and responses. You're supposed to add something, try to add something new, right? Try to add something new to the discussion. Keep the discussion going. So that's what I am looking for in the responses. Are you going to add something new to this? Are you going to maybe expand upon something that the original post didn't, right? Like I said, that's an example of doing both, something new and expanding on something. Or if you disagree, why do you disagree? Give an example of, if let's say we're going to talk later on about some of these political issues, then, why are you, if we're talking about the abortion issue, right? Are you pro-choice or pro-life or whatever? Talk about that, talk about why. And don't just give your personal viewpoints, right? I want you to give examples, right? Talk about maybe some things you've seen on the news, or you can use some personal examples, but again, I don't want for the post just to be personal examples. I want for you all to also incorporate stuff from the readings and also things that you might have seen in the in the news, right? So, and again, talking about again, just putting you did a nice job, or like how you said. I mean, you can start with that, but that's not the only thing that you're going to say, right? You also have to add your own thoughts and responses and reactions to this. So, okay, so does this make sense in terms of what I'm looking for, how I would want for you to do these discussions? Does this make sense or not really? Because I want to make sure that this makes sense before we get to the rubric. The rubric won't take too long, but I just want to make sure that this makes sense to you all. So it makes sense for the most part. And again, don't worry, I'll change this due date here later on. Okay, so if there's no questions, then last thing we're going to cover here with the discussion is the rubric. Okay, so let me show you all what the rubric looks like. Okay, So this is the rubric, okay? So each post is going to be for like 33, 30, pretty much, a third, right? So this is what I'm looking for. That, if the post significantly exceeds minimum requirements, so this is talking about, and of course, of length and the thoughtfulness of the content, right? So this is talking about, did you not just meet the 5 sentences, but did you go beyond it? Did you really explain your answer fully and detailed? And then same thing with the responses, right? Were your responses really good? Did you provide those details, those examples? Did you expand on the conversation? If you do that, then I can guarantee you get a good grade, right? If you don't do too much of that, if you're just kind of just you meet the minimum, but it's not right. If you meet the minimum, but it's not being done well, then, or if you meet the minimum, but it doesn't really expand it too much, like you're just kind of talking in generalities and not giving too many examples, then it's going to knock you down to a 75, unsatisfactory, did not include, and things like that, and then poor, not related, if you're just, I don't really get these because, no one is going to like take the time to just kind of just go off topic, but that's what I'm looking for, everyone. Now, also keep in mind that if you don't complete all 3, then there's nothing for me to grade there. So if, let's say, you just do 1 post, then the highest grade you can get is a 33 because there's nothing to grade, right? So I'm going to have to give you a 0 in here and a 0 in here because there are no replies. So, or if you do 2 replies, then the highest grade you can get is a 66 because, again, where's the other one over here? So make sure that you complete them, because if you don't, then you're only going to get partial credit, because I can't give you credit for something that's not there, right? So, okay, so does that make sense in terms of the discussions? Let me stop the share here really quickly. Does that make sense in terms of the discussions? Does that make sense in terms of how to go about them? Does this make more sense, everyone? Do you all have a better idea in terms of how to go about the discussions and what I'm looking for? Does this make sense or not really? Because please let me know if this still doesn't make sense, so I can re-explain some things before we leave for today. Okay, everybody's saying yes. Okay, all right, sounds good. Okay, well, let me go ahead and stop the record then. Okay.